All right, I'm passing it off, I think, to Carly.
That is right. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about the council. If you are unfamiliar, like Abby said, we do call ourselves WASAC all the time. um, but essentially, what we do is we are a cabinet level agency. We are working to raise educational attainment through a couple different ways. We are looking through strategic engagement, program management, and different partnerships, external and internal partnerships to work to accomplish those goals. So that's a little bit about what we are about. Next slide, please. We have had a lot of questions, as I'm sure some of you had, and some concerns about what will this look like for students, specifically our mixed status and undocumented student families, as we move forward in this next space here. So there's been some concerns about privacy and information on applications, and so what we have here is a statement that we will be using to send out to families, as well as or language you can use as well if this is helpful to you, to just provide a little bit more information about choice there. So, we know that students and families, they are going to be asked for very personal information to put on their application. And that information is part of the process. It's a really important part of that process. But we want families to know that they do have options if students, are uncomfortable with completing the federal FAFSA form. Even if they qualify for it, they can use the state aid application. But they would miss out on any federal aid that they could be eligible for. So we really recommend that students and families read the privacy statements associated with both of the applications, and we'll also be making sure to go through those here today. And so please let us know if you have any questions following that, but just wanted to make sure that you knew that we were thinking about this, really going to be working with families and letting others know about this language, and the options that are available to our families. All right, we'll move on here. So what does financial aid look like? We love an umbrella here at WASAC. There's a lot of things that follow under an umbrella, even though most of us are not necessarily umbrella users here in Washington State. No hate on those that are, though. So we like to look at it as an umbrella. Basically, there's different types of aid that are going to make up a student's financial aid picture. That picture helps them finance their education. And so the four main things that we take a look at when we think of financial aid is we're going to look at grants, which are income-based or need-based federal, state, and institutional aid available to students. So this is going to be based off of their financial aid application for eligibility, and maybe sometimes an institutional aid application. Then we have scholarships, and they can be merit-based, meaning they've done something to earn that, or income-based, depending on the scholarship itself, from public, private, and nonprofit sources. So we have lots of different places where scholarships can come from. Then we have a couple, what I like to do call it is the work for or payback part of the financial aid picture. So we have loans that are available to students. Some of those loans are income based, some of them are private, some are from the federal government. And then we have work study. Work study can sometimes be a more confusing part of the financial aid picture. But essentially, what work study is an opportunity for a student to work through an employer, whether that be on the college campus or through a state work study employer, for example. There also might be institutional types of work study opportunities available to students. And so the reason why it can be a little confusing is students will look at this on their financial aid letter and they'll be like, oh, well, do I just get that money directly? So any FAs on the meeting here today know that you're probably used to explaining that, no, this is just what you can earn up to in work study funding at your job, but you receive a paycheck just like you normally would from any other job. Yeah, so those are the four different types under the umbrella. So we'll move on to where those actually, the pathways for these different types of aid. So federal aid, it can typically be used at most schools in most states. So the way that students qualify for federal aid is through the federal application, the FAFSA. And they can, like I said, this is transferable to any other school in the state that is what we call Title IV eligible. And then the state aid is typically for residents to attend most colleges in the state. So here in Washington State, we call those colleges participating institutions, and we have about 65 to 67 of those institutions that qualify for state financial aid. And of course, that residency piece is a big piece to qualifying for state aid. Next, the college. Colleges will offer different types of opportunities. They're specific to that school. So, for example, a merit scholarship at that school would be a college opportunity there. It doesn't transfer from school to school. And then we have wonderful organizations like nonprofits, business, churches, other community organizations as well that offer scholarship opportunities to our students. And so, some examples of state financial aid. You may have heard of the Washington College Grant. It's just a small little bit of aid that we have available to students. I look forward to talking more about this. This is what I live and breathe a lot of, but it was formerly called the State Need Grant, Washington State Need Grant, but now it's called the Washington College Grant. Speaking of umbrellas, there's different things under this brand as well. There's, Washington College Grant for Apprenticeship, Washington College Grant Connect, different pieces that are involved in this. And we have College Bound, which is offered to students in middle school. They are signed up, and then they can utilize those funds later on. State Work Study, Passport to Careers works with our students that were in foster care and or unaccompanied and homeless youth opportunity. And then there's the Opportunity Grant. So these are just different pathways for our students. So speaking of Washington College Grant, we also call it WA Grant, which is part of our marketing kind of campaign for students to know that there's lots of different pathways to post-secondary education. And so it's a huge commitment to our students. And the thing that we're so lucky to have here in Washington State is that the WA Grant is an entitlement to students. So in previous years, there would be served and unserved populations with this type of funding, but now every student who's eligible for WA Grant receives WA Grants. So we love that about our state. We're very excited about this. And it is a commitment to students to give them different money towards their different educational pathways. Like I mentioned, apprenticeships, this might be certificate programs that qualify, as well as the typical routes to undergraduate education. So that is a little bit of how you may see WA Grant presented to the community too. I'm not sure if anyone has seen our ads or anything like that, but if you have been around Washington, you've probably seen some of these ads just letting people know what's available to them. So what does Washington College Grant actually do? It provides a lot of opportunity for a lot of families. So right here, you're going to see an example of the maximum amounts that a student could earn or to receive the full award. So in this example, you see a family size of one, they could earn up to $40,500 for the year and get a maximum award of Washington College Grant. You may be curious what that award looks like. That it actually pays full tuition and some fees at our public universities and colleges. So when we say a full award, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about full tuition paid through this grant. So that's a huge opportunity for students. And then we also have an income kind of span of income where a student could qualify for partial awards. And so in this case, a student that earns up to $62,500 could get a partial award of Washington College Grant. And you see below kind of what that looks like for a family of four and what the earnings would be in that case. So there's a lot more opportunity out there for a lot more students. And I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton to Christina.
Thank you. Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit more about the state funding, let's talk about federal funding and programs. So for federal funding programs, and we'll talk about who's eligible for that and even how data is used in a second. So federal programs include the federal Pell Grant, federal work study, so state and federal work study. There is subsidized and unsubsidized loans, as well as parent loans. And as I always, when I'm talking to parents about parent loans, I remind them that these loans stay in the parent's name for the cost of their child's education. And so, oh, are we able to see the screen?
I don't see anything on my end. I don't know if it's just me though.
Yeah, I see it.
Okay.
Let me just pause sharing and reshare and see if that triggers it for just the technology catching back up. Okay, we are back to screen sharing. A couple folks confirm that we
Okay.
can see.
Can you
Yep.
see? I can see it. And I see some people in the chat. Okay, yeah, I think we're good. If not, and you have any problems, sometimes leaving the Zoom and coming right back in, it'll like for some reason reset that. So you can always try that too, and we'll let you back in. So for the parent loans, those loans stay in the parent's name for their child's education. So we always caution to think about their own student debt first before they start taking out parent loans. And I say this because I've seen parents who have just signed the paperwork but not thought about how much money they're actually accruing in debt and their own debt. And so those are the four main types of federal loans. But before we dive even deeper, let's talk about how the data from the FAFSA is used. So federal law prohibits the collection of data from the FAFSA to be used for anything other than calculating federal aid and state aid. So it has to be used for financial aid purposes. This is the privacy statement right now. So we share this because we know there's privacy concerns that people have, and there's opportunities, as Carly said at the beginning, for students to utilize the WAFSA if they don't feel comfortable with the FAFSA. Next slide, please. So they will only share that information with the schools that the student lists. So that's up to 20 schools on there, and a couple federal and state agencies to determine eligibility. And so this is just for you to know so that if people ask about how data is used currently at this time, this is how federal data is used for the FAFSA. And just we added this in there because there's been a lot of questions about it. Let's go ahead and talk about eligibility though. So for the federal application, you have to be eligible. And to be eligible, you're either a U.S. National or permanent resident. And I'm added pictures of the cards here because you will hear people say, oh, it's a green card, but it's not always a green card. In fact, that's not even the color for some of the documentation. And some of the documentation may be older. So I think having a visual representation is helpful when looking at residency. When we're looking at residency and eligibility for federal student aid, we never make assumptions. We're always going to, when in doubt, if someone doesn't know which application to use or if they are eligible for federal aid, the WAFSA has an amazing questionnaire that will walk them through which one they should do. Next slide, please. So you're going to see here the next group is eligible non-citizens. And so these are going to be those who have either refugee, asylum granted, conditional permanent resident. A lot of these are going to be on arrival departure paperwork, which looks different, whether it's digital or the paper copy that they receive. And so if someone says, I have certain types of paperwork, it doesn't say on the customs paperwork which program they're a part of. There's just a code. And so those codes align to the person's status. There is modified components of this for Ukrainian citizens and those who are nationals who were paroled into the US between February 22 and September 24. Yes, and it's being recorded. And we'll have all of the resources to share with you to make sure you have everything. Next slide, please. So the other document that you might see is the non-immigrant status T visa, which is for human trafficking. And so this one, this is what the application looks like, but the actual document itself is hard to find. I brought this one up because there has been a lot of misconceptions from students that if they are a T immigrant visa, that they are not eligible for federal or state aid. I've heard from several people, and that's not the case. State aid has its own eligibility requirements, and federal has its own. And so when in doubt, I always tell students to go to the section in the federal student aid page that talks about other eligible non-citizens. Next slide. Okay, and then for citizens of Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, Palau, there's only certain types of aid that they can receive. And so for those students, they're eligible for Pell Grants, and some are only eligible for, there are some that are only eligible for specific types of funding. So you may not see all the types of funding come through when, depending on where they're from. Okay, rule of one. There can be only one. And this is the rule of one for financial aid applications. So in Washington, we have the FAFSA, we have the WAFSA, and students think, man, if I do both, I get twice the money. And that is not the case. All that happens is I get twice the gray hairs as we try to figure out what the student wanted. So students will complete the FAFSA or the WAFSA. If they're not sure which one they're going to do, they're going to go ahead and go to the WAFSA page. And there's an assessment tool that I talked about before that will let them know which one they're going to do. We never assume which one they're going to complete. We always let the student self-assess because we don't know their situations. For the FOSFA, it's going to be at fosfa.gov. For the WAFSA, it's going to be on the WASAC page under the WAFSA. They are both free. I'm going to say that again. It is free to apply for financial aid. If someone comes to you and says they are being charged to apply for financial aid, there are organizations out there that are charging students between $400 and $800 to assist them with language support in completing an application. There's a lot more support now this year, so I encourage students. It is free to apply. This is to get money, not to pay money out. So there's a lot of people wanting to help students, and they shouldn't have to pay for that support. So they're only going to do one application. Now, there can be like these random times where someone does two applications. For example, I had a student that was waiting for their citizenship, and that process takes a long time. They did the WAFSA until they were eligible for federal funding until that citizenship came through. And then mid-year, they applied for federal funding because they were now eligible for federal funding. So there may be cases, but we want them to do one or the other. Whatever is the either maximizes the aid or what the family's decision. Next slide. So there's going to be some students that don't meet the eligibility requirements for federal or state aid, and it could be that they don't meet either citizenship requirements or even Washington state residency requirements. And so for those who don't meet those requirements, I encourage you still work with those students on scholarships. There are so many scholarships out there, especially those amazing robust foundation scholarships. And there's also a scholarship site from Immigrants Rising that is a list of all scholarships that have no citizenship requirement. And what I love about this list is not only is it robust, it has graduate programs, which are like the unicorns of scholarships. So we want to make sure that we're sharing this out with students. If they are unable to access federal and state aid, maybe they can access scholarships to help offset the cost of their education. So as we kind of think about resources and working with students who are not eligible for federal or state funding, what resources are you using to support them? Are there resources or even, and people can put it in the chat, how are you supporting students that are not eligible for either type of funding? And you can feel free to put it in the chat and I will read them out. And if you don't want to message it in front of everybody, but you just want me to read it out, you can do a direct chat to me. Departmental funding, yeah. Oh yes, foundation scholarships, a big one. Emergency funds and payment plans, yeah. Those are great opportunities. Payment plan is how I was able to finish my degree at one point, so they are a wonderful opportunity. Applying for scholarships, yeah. Ooh, community grants too. I love this. I think that there's so many creative ways to help students navigate the education that they need to help them find a livable wage job that they love. Talking directly to the financial aid office. Financial aid officers are such an amazing wealth of information, and students are sometimes scared to come talk to them because they're afraid that they'll say the wrong thing, and then they find out that the financial aid officers are these wonderful people. And they're like, why didn't I talk to this person earlier? They are just amazing resources. And I always tell students, unfortunately, our financial aid officers, they're not psychic. So they don't know that you're struggling. So you have to reach out to them until we have like psychic financial aid officers. These are all great. Thank you. We just want to make sure that students know that there are pathways and there's a lot of resources out there to get to your education. And I love the different options that you put in here. Thank you so much for sharing. So one of the ways that reduces the cost of education is being a Washington State resident so that you can get residency tuition. In Washington State, to be a Washington resident, there was a new law in 2021 that replaced HB 1079, which a lot of us still hold near and dear to our hearts. But really what it's done is it created more alignment so that those who are maintaining a primary resident in Washington State for purposes other than college for 12 months before going into college can become a Washington resident as long as they are eligible to maintain that domicile. Not all visa statuses will allow someone to maintain a domicile in the United States. So it depends on their visa status. Like if they are here on a work visa, typically they will not allow work visas to maintain a domicile within the United States. So there are some like different pieces to look at, but we have such an amazing residency program when it comes to aligning it for the 12 months that really like Washingtonians, like if someone's not a Washingtonian and they can survive 12 rainy, smoky, sunny, maybe snowy, depending on the side of your mountains. If you survive 12 months of those, then you're one of us. As long as you can maintain that domicile, you're here for purposes other than the college. We encourage you then to get rid of your umbrella, get a jacket with a hood, and get some sweet, sweet state funding. Next slide. And when I say sweet funding, I'm talking about all of these programs. We have the Washington College Grant, which is amazing. I'm a huge fan of the Washington College Grant because it replaced the state need grant, and that's what paid me to go to school. State need grant is the reason why I get to do what I love every day and get paid a family wage for it. And that's what I want for students. It also includes College Bound, which is our program for youth. It's an early commitment of state funds to youth who are signed up automatically, who are in middle school receiving or eligible for free or reduced price lunch. So if they're eligible for free or reduced price lunch, then in middle school, they're automatically enrolled. And in college, it pays off immensely. It's when students will have 4 years of, if they're eligible, at the highest public rate of tuition, some fees, and a small book allowance. We also have Path Toward Careers, which we already talked about, an amazing program. And if you're working with youth who are experiencing unaccompanied homelessness and they're in the K-12 system, I encourage you to have them connect with their McKinney-Vento specialist to see if they're eligible for additional supports that help them not just navigate getting into college, but navigating graduating high school, experiencing something that no one should ever have to experience, especially not a child. And so that program is very helpful for students. The Washington State Opportunity Scholarship is one of the best kept secrets. It shouldn't be a secret. It should be shouted from the rooftops. It is a STEM scholarship. It is last dollar. It is amazing. And it'll open up, I believe the 4-year one opens up soon here, but they have a 2-year scholarship and a 4-year scholarship, and they connect the students to mentors. And then the opportunity grant is for low-income students, and it helps them complete up to a year of college. There's so many options in Washington State for funding. Like Washington is the best state ever, not just because we have mountains and oceans and rivers, but because also we have amazing equitable funding. So because I shared the privacy statement for the FAFSA, I wanted to also share the privacy statement for the WAFSA because I know students might ask you about how data is used. And we want to make sure that students are informed so they can make the best decision for themselves. That's an informed decision. And so Washington, like the Washington Student Achievement Council, we administer state aid, including some of the amazing people who are presenting today. We use the information. Basically, we're committed to protecting the confidentiality of the information and privacy of students and families. Washington State's committed to providing opportunities for students and protecting the information as well. And as we said at the beginning, students do have the option, if they don't want to do a federal application, to do the state application. Oh, thank you. Okay, so eligibility requirements for federal aid. And for state aid. So for state aid, you have to be a Washington resident. So for federal aid, you have to be like meet those eligibility requirements. But for Washington State, you have to be a Washingtonian. So you have to be a Washington resident. And so I think about it this way: for Washington funds have to be used by Washingtonians in Washington. So students can't take these funds out of state. They have to use them in state. But who would want to leave the beautiful state of Washington? And even if they want to fly free, you can drive like 6 hours of the state and still be in Washington. So there's lots of options at your beautiful institutions across the state. So either being, the other piece of this for the residency is that there may be other components that could impact residency, like veteran status and tribal members. So there may be other pieces that would allow residency depending on the circumstances. Next slide. Okay. So for students who are not eligible for federal and state aid, we have these resources. And then we also have other options for students who are undocumented as in forms of resources as well, just to make sure that they're supported through this process. And we also, on the next slide, oops. before we jump into application issues. So we'll have our resources here, and then I'm going to pass it off. Carly's going to talk about where to find the common issues with the application and how to work through them. So I'll pass it off to Carly.
Thanks, Christina. All right, so we have a couple different resources for you in terms of how to assist students when you're sitting with them with the FAFSA or WASFA, and you're like, something is not working. There are some places for you to go for help, and kind of what we're going to talk about is a little bit different on the FAFSA side and the WASFA side. So for the FAFSA side, we've kind of included this link here for different issues that you can visit. Specifically, this would be where you would go to do any workarounds with students that are mixed status families. They're having a hard time entering parent information. But along, that issue amongst others are going to be reported here, and you can see, what's going on, if it can be fixed, if there's a workaround. So we love this website for assisting students as they're completing their applications. Now, on the WASFA side of things, we know about a couple different issues we thought we would highlight that are happening and some workarounds for those. So there is an issue of student parent getting stuck in step 2, view my forms portion of the electronic signature. So part of signing the WASFA involves downloading their application. There's a little download icon when students are signing. And so what happens is we've noticed that this is happening when students are on their phones, and specifically in the Safari browser. So the real workaround for this is just using, doing the electronic signature process from a computer or desktop computer, or using a different browser type like Google Chrome or Firefox, which will open up another tab for that. So that's just something easily worked around and something to be aware of if you are assisting students with the WASFA. The second issue that we're kind of aware of is multiple applications display in an account, or why does the application status show as in progress or in red if a student already submitted? So a student logs into their WASFA account, and they're like, oh, I have a ton of different applications in here. What's going on? So essentially, anytime a student enters their application by clicking on the edit completed form button after they've originally submitted it, basically it thinks that they're making it or starting a new application or transaction, kind of similar to the FAFSA, like a new transaction. And so if the student doesn't need to make any edits to their original application and they just would like to review the information provide on their application, they're encouraged to do so by just downloading their application itself. There's a PDF version of that they can look through, and then they won't have that one sitting out there. If not, it's not going to hurt anything to have that just application sitting out there in terms of, they started to edit it. It's not going to change anything for them. For the schools that they've submitted their initial application to, there won't be any problems there. And then just to mention here, if there are additional issues, please do email or call us. I will include the email in the chat, but basically it's just wasfac@wasac.wa.gov. As Leslie talked about a little bit earlier, she is on top of that, helping students in their families and schools all day long, assisting with questions that they might have with their application. And we'll put the number in the chat as well. So feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help, happy to take a call or, with students and families or school, whatever works best so that we can help resolve the issue. I'm going to pass it on. So now we know about the workarounds. Now we know how to fix the issues. And I'm going to pass it to Yasleen to talk about navigating the FAFSA.
All right. So we'll navigate the first, either little first slides that you all see when you log into the FAFSA and how to present it. So this is what the website looks like. This is the initial page, and then there's the page with the little hot air balloons and all that kind of stuff. So next slide, please. The FAFSA can be presented either through website or paper FAFSAs. As we know, this last year, there was a big delay with the paper FAFSAs. So we're strongly encouraging students to file on the website. If there's, for any reason, that does not work and the paper FAFSA is the only way to go for that student, great, let's just get it in. But we're strongly encouraging the website. The website is now available in English and Spanish. The there are an interpretation line that students can call into if they are needing help filing in different languages. The first step to every single FAFSA, whether that be a student or their contributor, which is their parent or legal guardian, is the FSA ID. So for this, students will need their social security number and either their own phone number or email. We always encourage both because it will ask you what is your communication preference, and if the student clicks email but doesn't put in an email, only puts in a phone, they're not receiving that communication. So we always just ask them if they can to provide both. If they provide either or, to remember which one they provided, so then they click the appropriate communication style. Also, if they provide both, it might make it easier to, if they forgot their login or their phone number changed, now they have a backup, whether that be their email address, their login, their phone number, whatever it may be. For contributors, if they do not have a social security number, then there is a drop down that says I do not count with an SSN. They change the language on that, I feel like, every single day. So something within those words, it will say, you click on the drop down, it'll show you like an advisory. This is what you're saying, that you don't have an SSN. Click on the button and you can continue to the next page. This will be after the student or parent has logged in. This is what the login page will look like. If it's a student, they'll click the student. If it's a parent, I'll click the parent, and then it will send them to their appropriate section. Every student and parents will receive these onboarding videos. There are 4 of them. They're not mandatory to watch. If the student, we recommend the students watch them so they know what they're doing and what information they're putting down and what's next, but they're not mandatory. Okay. To update, we always ask the students to review and update any information. So again, if they've changed their email address, their phone number, all of that kind of stuff. They can do that if they go to the settings on the top right-hand corner of their FAFSA. There will be a drop down where it says account settings, and then they can change or make revisions to whatever they need to. We always encourage students that are in high school, but even like in college, if students are still using their high school email, to change that, or if they haven't created an account yet and they're in high school and they're thinking about using their high school email, we always discourage that, because after a while, those emails can get erased, or the students just don't remember the login to those emails anymore, and that's where they're receiving their information, so they won't be able to access it as easily. Okay, so after the student has gone through majority of their application, they will be asked to provide consent. This page just basically informs the student about the federal tax information being transported from the IRS to their FAFSA application, and it's required. So even though you're providing consent, it's a required consent to be eligible for federal funds, and that's why those big black letters are at the very top. That you have to provide consent and approval, or you won't be eligible for federal student aid. Okay, so something cool that this FAFSA is now offering is that I will ask the student for their personal circumstances. And so this will gauge also if the student needs extra support while they're in college. They can connect those dots while they're there. And it also provides another avenue for students to be deemed independent if that's what is needed for that student or for that situation. Okay, so if the student is a dependent student, the student will invite their parents to their FAFSA form. We do have like a list of whether they're independent or dependent. If you all have any questions on that, we can also provide that. But basically, most commonly, students will be dependent students unless they're over the age of 24, married, have been in the military, and there's a bunch of other ones. But typically, students are dependent. They will invite their parents to their form, and they will need to know their parents' name, social security number if they have one, date of birth, and then their address. And it's really important to remember how they've entered this. If the parent has two last names and the student only enters in, let's say, one last name and not the other, but when the parent makes their account, they enter in both last names, those invitations, like the names on the invitation to the account won't match. So the parent won't receive that invitation. So it's really important when students are filling this out that they double check with their parent or guardian that the name is right, their social security is right, their date of birth is right, and that the address they're putting in is also correct. Take a picture if needed.
Yasleen, there's a question in the chat of what happens if parents live outside the country.
I don't remember. I'll bump it over to Christina.
Yeah, if the parents live out of country, and they have if the student has a relationship with that parent, then they're going to still need to get the parents to create FSA IDs even outside of the country. They will, unless they're in a legal guardianship as defined by a court or some other circumstances, they will need to take their parents' income from whatever country they're in and convert it to the United States dollar and enter that information in their income section. So they'll have to do a manual entry.
All right. So the student will fill out their demographics. There's a lot of these questions where students can click prefer not to respond. And I get a lot of questions like, what if I don't identify with any of these races or genders or whatever it may be? There's always a prefer not to answer option. And I always say like, it's okay because it's not going to go against the student. It's just for research. Then the student will put in their finances. So if they worked, if they filed taxes. And then after they've filled out every section, they will have a student review page. I always encourage students to go through every single drop down and make sure that everything is okay, that everything is filled out to the best of their knowledge. They can go back in right here and edit if they found a mistake or whatever it may be. They can edit then, and then the dependent student will be able to see the parent contributor section and the status of like the invitation. So let's say the parent is sitting next to them and they're like, I haven't received the invitation. The student can look at that status and see if it's been sent or not. Sometimes maybe you can even forget to press the button that says like send invite or whatever, and they'll let you move on. But this is an opportunity to go back and send that invite. Also to edit the name of the invite or whatever it may be. So I always encourage students to go through this and take their time. Like I said, the contributor section, they will be able to see the status and when they sent it, if they've received it, if they've opened it, if they're taking action in it, it all shows that. Okay, so they've submitted it now. So then it'll give them an eligibility overview or the FAFSA submission summary. And this will go down like through sections saying they may be eligible for up to whatever in federal Pell Grants, or they may be eligible up to whatever amount in the loans and stuff like that. So this is an opportunity where you see an estimate.
Yasleen, there's another question in the chat. Are students able to manually enter tax information still rather than have the tax information using the IRS data retrieval tool?
It depends on the student situation. I think all families, so students and parents, need to provide consent and approval. Whether the information is being entered manually or not. I think currently the only population that can do that right now is those who are undocumented. And then please correct me if I'm wrong, Christina.
Those who are undocumented and those who've experienced a divorce in between the tax period and the application period will also manually enter. But there's not an option to manually enter. Like if you have tax information they can retrieve, they're going to use it. You can't manually enter. They have to give consent to be eligible for aid, and they have to use the data retrieval tool, unfortunately.
All right, and then I'll pass it to Leslie.
Okay, so now we'll go into kind of a more condensed version of navigating the WASFA application, which does closely mirror the FAFSA. So next page, please. Okay, yeah, so to begin with on the WASFA, students will be directed to the sign in or login page. Any returning students who have an existing account will just use their email and password information to log in. New students will need to create an account, and as you can see in the arrow, they will just click on the sign up button to be directed to create their account. They will need an email address, and like Yasleen mentioned, we do ask that students use a personal email address versus a student email. And then they'll need to create a password, their name, and we also ask that they use the name that they will be providing to the college so that that matches their date of birth. They will be asked for an SSN or DACA ITIN number. However, it's not required for the WASFA. So if a student does not have either of those, they just leave that section blank and will be able to move forward. And then lastly, if a student had created a WASFA account prior to 2015, they will be asked to enter their WASFA ID. But if that's not the case, they just disregard that section. Yeah, so there is a WASFA eligibility questionnaire. And so on that questionnaire, it does ask students whether or not they're eligible or have already submitted a FAFSA application. Currently, if a student answers no, they will then be able to move forward with creating a WASFA account. If a student does answer yes, they will receive the following message as shown here. That is a bug, so we are working to fix that. As mentioned before, students who are otherwise eligible to complete the FAFSA but choose to complete the WASFA can do so. But at this time, in those situations, they'll just need to click on no for now to be able to move forward. Because if they do click yes, they will receive this error message and will not be able to move forward. So just kind of wanted to spotlight that here. But again, we are working to implement a fix for that. And
Leslie,
then
before you jump in, there's another question in the chat. What happens if students have an ITIN number and does not put it in the WASA application?
yeah, so they can always go back into their application to edit. So for example, if they provided the ITIN number to the college, then yeah, we do ask that the student does go ahead and log into their application to make that edit and include it in their application. So their information should match exactly what they're providing to their college. And so once a student logs into their account, this is the WASFA dashboard that they will see. So then it will display the application for the academic year that they need to complete. They can access the application through the WASFA dashboard or under the document section directly underneath the dashboard. So there's two different ways in which they can access or enter the application. And so, yeah, unlike the FAFSA, the parent will receive an invitation to sign the student's WASFA application for dependent students specifically to avoid confusion between student-parent accounts, because we do know that students typically help their parents with creating the parent accounts. And, sometimes with emails, it can be a little confusing. So there is a welcome message that will either say hello student or welcome parent. And that's how a student or parent can tell whether or not they're in a student or parent account, as well as the registered name for both parent and student accounts will display on the top right-hand side as highlighted in red here. So that's just kind of a way in which students and parents can tell whether they're logged into the correct account or if they're in a parent or student account. And so once a student is in the application, they will see on the left-hand side this green section here. And the section that a student is currently working in will be highlighted in blue as shown here. So for example, in this situation, student would be in the student school list section. All completed sections will have a check mark next to them, and all sections that still need to be completed or are missing required fields will show a stopwatch with a little arrow as shown on the last half of that green section, as well as each section has a specific number of pages. And as you can see in the middle screenshot, it will show whether or not they're in page 1 of 3 or 3 of 3. And that's how a student can tell on which page of a specific section they're currently working in. Yeah, so once a student or applicant reaches the Washington State information section, they will then be prompted to the residency affidavit where they do have to certify yes or no. Here's a screenshot example of the affidavit that students do have to certify to. Basically, there's 3 main sections. One being that they are certifying that they will have earned a high school diploma, GED, or equivalent prior to their first term at college, to maintain a primary residence within the state of Washington, as we discussed earlier. And then number 3, promising that one of the following is true, that they will file an application to become a permanent resident of the US as soon as they are eligible to apply, or 2, that they are currently a US citizen, national, or permanent resident. And so for that affidavit piece, if a student answers that they will not meet those eligibility requirements, any of the 3 that are listed there, they will then be presented with an additional question piece here. So it will ask if they have a current or expired DACA status, a current work authorization, or TPS or U visa. If a student answers yes, they will then be prompted to finish or complete the rest of the WASP application as normal. If a student answers no to this question, specifically the additional question in this piece, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. They will then receive the following message as shown here. So if they certify no, based on their response, the application is not able to determine their eligibility for state aid. And so we recommend that they work with their financial office directly for more information. Yeah, and this is important to note because it does mean that a student can complete the WASFA even if they don't meet the eligibility requirements or the specific residency requirement. And so like the FAFSA on the WASFA, there is also a student unusual circumstances section here. And so I know it's hard to see on this slideshow specifically, but here in the blue section, it does list examples of, circumstances or situation in which a student can indicate they are experiencing unusual circumstances. And if a student does indicate yes to any of these questions in that section, they will be determined as independent for financial aid purposes and will not be prompted to then enter information about their parent or legal guardian and will be able to submit as an independent student. Yeah, so once a student has completed all required fields and sections and they all display a check mark as shown here, they will then need to agree to the disclosure and review the application before they can electronically sign. Dependent students will need to invite a parent to sign their application in order for the application to be successfully submitted. Again, independent students, once they sign the application, it's completed and they do not need to invite a parent to sign. All right.
Leslie, there was a question while you were going through the walkthrough in the chat that is a little bit broader of what's the process of a college to match a WAFSA application with the admissions application if the student doesn't use an ITIN or SSN in their WAFSA application?
Yeah, so if a student doesn't use an I-10 or SSN for the WASFA specifically, they will go based off of their WASFA ID, and they will be awarded off of their WASFA ID. But I'm going to go ahead and pass this on to Carly to see if there's anything that she wants to add on.
Yeah, thanks, Leslie. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So every student is assigned a WASPA ID, and then financial aid offices kind of use a scale of what to award the student under. So if the student has an SSN, they will award the student under the SSN. If they have an I-10, they'll award them under the I-10. And then if they have neither, they'll award them under their WASFA ID. And so to match with the admissions application, I think would probably be other demographic information like their date of birth and name to be able to match the student with their actual WASFA application.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, so I guess next question is what resources have you found to be helpful when assisting students with navigating either the WASP or FAFSA application? And I'm not sure who is taking over next, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Yasleen. Okay.
Yeah, so if you all want to join the Slido, either with scanning the QR code or going to the webpage and then putting in the code, we would like to just know what resources you have found helpful, whether that be doesn't have to be like directly from us. It could be whatever in your community has been helpful to you all. Okay. And then, yeah, anonymous or you can put your name, it doesn't matter. Okay, Futures Northwest. We love Futures Northwest. Amazing. Referrals to our student financial resource prep. Good. Screen share photos, applications during this training. Yeah. Yeah, we will be working on a line by line of the FAFSA in English and in Spanish, which has like those screenshots of every single slide in the FAFSA in a presentation form. So then that will also help you all as you're helping students to see maybe like, oh, what slide is next? Or the student is like, oh, I didn't get asked this, or because they maybe don't remember, or whatever that may be, you now have like those slides that you can kind of go based off of like, nope, you did answer that, or it should have been 2 slides back. Like, let's go back and revisit that type of stuff. So anyway, all of that to be said that we will have that available for you all within the next upcoming weeks. Yay, going straight to the WASAC website. I love that. Thanks. Oh, the WASFA questionnaire. Yes, we always encourage our schools to, if their student does not know whether they're filling out the FAFSA or the WASFA, or to not make that determination for a student, to always start with the WASFA questionnaire. So we love it as well. Explaining what the affidavit is. Yes, that was tricky last year. Yeah. We'll have more time to ask questions at the end.
Yasleen, do you want me to move on to the next one?
I think so. I don't see the little bubble with the more people, so.
Cool, cool.
Okay, next one. What resources would be helpful for you to have that you aren't already currently aware of? Multi-languages services. That's a good one. I think that's something that we as like an agency are trying to work on, but I know a lot of different school districts that I visited have always been trying to work on that, or we always encourage them reaching out to community partners because that's where a lot of those language services come from. So yeah, if you haven't tried that, community partners might be a good first step. How to utilize WS funds to pay undocumented students that don't have to work, that don't have that work authorization. Yeah, that's a good one. I'm sure that can be a larger conversation as well. How institutions interpret the affidavit. We need like the little music or something.
I know we need the Jeopardy soundtrack.
Yes, in my head it's playing. How to train financial aid advisors on supporting undocumented students. I 100% agree. Which is hopefully something that will be in the works within this next year. Guidance about privacy for WASPA workshops and university settings. So for this, at least how we've done it with like high school students, which would translate over to university settings, is that we highly encourage counselors, financial aid advisors that are at schools, career college readiness people to advertise their events as financial aid workshops, not a specific either FAFSA or WASFA. Just as in everyone is welcomed and will support you in whatever application you're doing, because that way our WASFA students aren't just like excluded, like now you have a room full of possibly like undocumented students. Like that's not what we're aiming for. It's how do we support all students, but making sure that there's still those WASFA students are receiving that extra support that they may need to fill out the WASFA. So that's something that we've encouraged, but willing to hear other people's ideas. Some parents were deported and decided to leave their kids in this country. However, students are depending on their parents. Students apply for FAFSA. How do we prove their income? I think Christina touched on this earlier, but they would have to convert their whatever currency into dollars, and then they would have to submit they would have to submit I'm sorry, my brain is blinking. Supporting documentation on that their income is truly that income.
They'll most likely be picked for verification, so having that documentation ahead of time is very helpful.
All right, I think we can move on. So a lot of you, or at least one of you, said translated resources and materials. And we have not a ton and not in all of the languages we would want to have them in, but we have some. And it's really hard to tell because the boxes are really small. But the box that is on the right-hand side, it says translated materials. We're working on uploading all of our translated materials on there. But our materials are mostly translated English and Spanish. We do have some materials that are in other languages, in the five spoken languages, but mostly just English and Spanish for the moment, and then hopefully we can work on that. The box on your left-hand side is resources for mixed status families, and this is a new box that we added recently, and we're working on putting more resources up there. There are a handful of them right now, but as we learn from more and just like trusted messaging and stuff, that's where that will be. Okay, one more that we would like to hear from y'all. What language support are you needing? Like I said, we're hopefully trying to expand our languages, and sometimes census information isn't the most dependable. So we're trying to scope it out. What languages are the most popular, maybe in your region, in your school, things like that. Hindi, Punjabi language in the Philippines. Like, okay. Awesome. I think we're good to move on. I don't see the bubble anymore. Okay, so now a couple of resources that we have for you all. There are much more on our website too, or if you're looking for something super specific and can't find it on our website, then please always feel free to like shoot us an email and we'll provide you all with that. But the FAFSA prototype, this is a really good resource for you all as practitioners. If you all want to do like the FAFSA as a parent, a student, and see what that looks like, this is where you all can do that. Uh, yeah. The WASFA sample application, the same thing as the like FAFSA prototype, but now in the WASFA form. So again, same thing. You can see what that looks like for a student or a parent. The application guide is like kind of how our FAFSA line by line is, but the WASFA is in a guide form. So that's cool. A PDF as well, and you can kind of go through the questions. Again, if your student is stuck and is like, I don't think it asks me what my last name was or whatever it may be, you can go back and say, nope, that was on the first page. So if you don't remember that, let's go back to the first page. The state financial aid calculator. This will allow students and families to see how much Washington state aid is available for them. This could be a game changer for students in general, especially this year. If students are uncomfortable filling out the FAFSA application and now they're just going towards the WASFA route, but maybe they're anxious and they don't know how much money they're going to be getting from state aid. This is a way that they can kind of see an estimate. There is no for sure way to see how much money they will receive unless they fill out the FAFSA or WASFA. All right, Padlet for students. I always encourage students to get this link, take a picture, whatever they want, because this has all the right links for the students. They're not looking. Number one question at the financial aid events is like, well, how do I get to the FAFSA or how do I get to the WASFA? Where in our head it's like, well, you just type it in, but they don't know that because they haven't done that before, or maybe they don't remember how they did it in the past. So this has all the correct links on there. It has the FAFSA, the WASFA links, what to do when you get stuck, who to contact for certain things. The state financial aid calculator is on there, and the federal estimator is also on there. Okay, the college access Padlet. similar thing, but for you all. It has all the links to everything you could possibly need. We have a financial aid updates column now, where that's the thing that's constantly updated. That's the thing that we can get to the fastest and that we can update the fastest. So Christina does a really good job at keeping that up to date. Training opportunities, OtterBot, all of those extra supports are also on there. That also has a translations piece to it. And yeah. And we're going to open up to questions. So we're going to stop recording and yeah, open to questions.